All right, friends, we're going to hop right in tonight. Let me give you a couple of announcements. Most of you have already found the little Japanese candies that are on the table. We got those from Jonathan and Tommy Ann Guffey. Terry, Lynn, and I met them for lunch here. What was it, yesterday? Boy, all my days are rolling together. But we met them, and they gave us a bag of those. They're doing very well. Please keep them in your prayers. They have a typhoon. It's landing in East Taiwan, and it's supposed to pretty much just wreck their side of the island. And so they've got security cameras at their house that they're kind of checking in on to see what the damage is going to be. But they're not going back to East Taiwan until I believe it's the 22nd. And so if there's a lot of damage at their house, it'll be a while before they can get there. And so just keep them in your prayers. Again, we want to continue to lift them up. Enjoy the candies. I will say this, if Brenda wants any more, can somebody open them for Brenda? She's opened a few of them, and it sounds like gunfire. Okay, so now we are. Another thing for you, I think it was Faye a couple of weeks ago brought up, hey, do we have any decaf coffee? We did not until just last week, and I forgot to announce it last week. But if you would like decaf coffee, we do have decaf K-Cups over here that you are more than welcome to help yourself to. I hope you all know, friends, this was a big test of how much I love you, because in our house, decaf coffee, I call it the Pharisee blend. That's what I call it, okay? Now think about this. Let me just give you a spiritual lesson here. This one's free. Think about the Pharisees. They looked like the real deal, right? But they didn't have any of the power, right? Right? Decaf coffee, it's the same thing. It looks like coffee, smells a little bit like coffee, but it doesn't have any of the power, and I would argue it does not taste like real coffee. All that healthy stuff, no. Give me all the bad stuff, okay? But if you would like the Pharisee blend, we do have it over there, and yeah, it's like that unleavened, little leaven leavens the whole lump, friends. So we'll just pray for you while you sip on your coffee. All right. So what's that? Uh-oh. Well, if I go long tonight, you know why. All right, friends, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 13 in your Bibles, and on page 15, you'll find that written out in your workbooks. So Genesis chapter 13 and page 15 in your workbooks has that passage. We'll start filling in blanks on page 16. Can I have someone open us in prayer tonight and ask God to teach us through this passage? We're finally going to get to see Abraham get something right, and it's going to be pretty exciting. So can somebody ask God to teach us tonight? Thank you, Faye.
Lord, that we might be able to implant your word there. Lord, that we would be doers of your word, not hearers only. Lord, speak to us, show us, guide us. We thank you for him. We thank you for him being willing to teach us and lead us. We ask for your anointing over him. Yeah. And we ask that you would be with us and we would leave this place and carry the word with us.
Amen. Thank you, Faye. All right, Genesis chapter 13. I'm going to read the entire chapter. It's a shorter chapter. It's only 18 verses, and we're going to be able to cover the whole thing tonight, okay? But you need to know the whole story before we dive into verse 1. So track with me on page 15 or Genesis 13 if you have your Bibles. Verse 1 says, "So Abraham went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Abraham was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. He went on his journeys from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been in the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there formerly. And there Abraham called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, and the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to remain together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Now the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling then in the land. So Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right. Or if to the right, then I will go to the left." Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all the valley of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the valley and moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked exceedingly and sinners against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, "Now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, then your descendants can also be numbered. Arise, walk about the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you." Then Abram moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there built an altar to the Lord. Okay, so there's a lot that happens in this passage. Basically, what we're going to see is this. Abraham and his nephew Lot both have so many possessions now that they're coming out of Egypt. They're back in the promised land, the land of Canaan. There's so many possessions that it causes a little bit of a family feud. Now, one of the things you see a lot in the Bible, and you can see this at the top of page 16 in your workbooks, one of the things you see a lot in the Bible is a passage will tell us the story of two people and how they interact with each other in a situation. And the goal for us is to compare and contrast these two people, because one of them handles things correctly and pleases God, and the other handles things incorrectly and displeases God. In fact, the first time you see this in the Bible is with Cain and Abel, right? They're both bringing an offering. They're both in the same circumstance, but one does something right and the other does something wrong. And we're supposed to compare and contrast Cain and Abel and learn a lesson from that. Well, the same thing's happening here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of minutes where you are, read through this passage again. Look on page 15. What are things that you see these two people doing differently inside of this conflict they're having? How does Abraham do things differently than Lot? And how do things turn out differently for them? Because there's lessons we're supposed to learn here. So take a few minutes. I'll give you 3 or 4 minutes. Just look through the passage. What jumps out to you? What do they do differently? How do they handle the conflict differently? Okay, so before I have you hop in and share a couple of things that you've seen, now it's important to keep in mind the lesson that Abraham got wrong last time. So here's what Abraham got wrong. We said that where God places you, he's promised to what? He's promised to bless you or provide for you, right? Where God places you, he's promised to provide for you. Now, God has brought Abraham all the way back, and he's going to put him in yet another situation where Abraham has to determine, can I trust God to take care of me or not? Just like before with the famine that we saw last week. So he's going to be repeating the class. This is the same exact lesson. It's just different details, okay? Now, what are some things that you see that Abraham and Lot do differently?
Abraham called on God, he built an altar, and Lot, he just went along for the ride.
Yeah, so Lot is really not taking a whole lot of initiative in his faith here, right? In fact, he hasn't, at least as far as we know, the entire time. He's just following Abraham. He's not developing a personal relationship with God on his own. He's just tagging along, right? And there's a big difference between those two things. Okay, what else?
Well, Abraham was generous.
Ah.
And Lot was selfish, opportunistic.
Yeah. So Abraham was remarkably generous. We're actually going to look at how generous in just a little bit, because that was a massive gesture that Abraham let Lot pick. And then what does Lot do? He chooses for himself the best land, and he takes all of it. He takes all of the best land available. That's very good. What else?
Wouldn't you call Abram there a peacemaker? Because he said he didn't want strife.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so Abraham is taking the initiative to make peace. Now, does Lot's response bring about more peace, or would it actually have most likely brought about strife? Taking all of the land for yourself honestly could have, and you could argue should have, made things worse, right? If Abraham wasn't being as generous and as big-hearted as he was, I mean, he was big-hearted to let him choose in the first place, like Terry mentioned, but now taking all of the best land for yourself, that could have blown up all over again, right? But Abraham's going above and beyond to be a peacemaker here. Absolutely. What else do you see?
Abraham was the senior. He was the elder, right?
He was Yeah, so we'll see this in a little bit, but you hit the nail on the head, Rick. As the senior, Abraham in that culture had every right to take everything and tell Lot to just basically get lost and take a hike, okay? He didn't have to let Lot choose anything at all. He could have said, I'm taking it all, you can find your own country. So,
we don't see anything about Lot except strife. We see Abraham offering solutions.
Right.
But all that's listed about Lot is strife.
Right.
So he's not offering any good parts of anything.
No, and as the younger man in this situation, it's his job to notice the strife and remove himself before Abraham even has to approach him. That's the way they handled it back in that day. So he should see the strife between the herdsmen and say, hey, I'm sorry, I'm gonna take off here, and I'm gonna give you some space, Abraham, but this is your land because you're the senior. He doesn't do any of that. Give me one or two more thoughts. Yeah.
So I have a study Bible with that one.
Okay.
And it says in here, Abram knew he would not obtain wealth except by the Lord's grace.
Ah. So had he learned the lesson? He finally learned the lesson. He realized that he didn't have to take care of himself because God brought him right back to this place. And if God brought me here, God's going to provide for me here. I don't need to assert my rights and take the whole land. Even though I can, I don't need to because God will provide for me. I can play the peacemaker and be generous because I know God's still going to take care of me even if I disadvantage myself by giving away. Disadvantaging yourself is not always a bad thing, friends. God can take care of you in a big way despite that, okay? Lynn.
And it says, because he did that, it still says he looked to the Lord again and thanked him and built no more.
Yes. He knew God would provide.
God is looking today. Abraham's looking at eternity.
Ah.
Big difference in perspective.
That is one of the lessons we will look at the end.
And I think it's interesting that Lot chose land that included some and the wicked. Did he know that reputation?
He did, because it says they were an exceedingly great city. Yeah. So here's the interesting thing with Lot. He sees this land over to the east, and it's the most beautiful and fertile land you can find, but it comes with sin right on the side. Do you take the fertile land and all the wealth that you could accumulate with that, even though it gets you closer to sin, or should you distance yourself from sin? Even if it means taking land that's less fertile. Lot made a poor choice here, and you're going to see that more when we get to chapter 19, right? And so there's something to be said for just because a decision looks good on the surface, sometimes you have to look at and say, okay, but what comes with this decision in the end? Where is this ultimately going to lead me? Because it led him closer to Sodom. And eventually he moves into Sodom and takes a leadership role in Sodom, and that destroys his whole family. If Lot today could come back and try all over again, the last place he would take would be the field he chose. That's the last place he would take. Give me one more thought. You guys are doing great.
You know, I use the word best because Lot took the best, but Abram received the best.
Okay, so who was really in control the whole time? It was God. In your strife, in your conflict with other people, even if it's family members, who's in control the whole time? It's God. So what role should we play? Peacemaker. We should play the role of peacemaker, even if it disadvantages us, because God's the one who oversees how the whole thing works out in the end anyway, right? God's the one who will take care of the results in the end. All we answer to God for is not the results, but we answer to God for being the peacemaker who's faithful and obedient, right? So let me give you a few blanks here on page 16. Back in the promised land. Now, after being deported from Egypt by Pharaoh, Abraham and Sarah, they traveled back to where they should have stayed all along. So they travel back to where they should have stayed all along. Now, verse 2 tells us, right at the beginning of verse 2, it says that Abraham was very rich. Now, that's an important Hebrew word that really means heavy. Now, we looked last time at how they used different word pictures. Remember, we said it was a liver famine, and that was a weighty or a severe famine. Well, the same kind of concept here. This word literally means this guy was heavy. This is where we get the idea when we say somebody's loaded, right? The idea is back then, they wouldn't count up how much their money was worth, right? You wouldn't say, I'm a millionaire. You would say, I'm very heavy. Because if you were to weigh it, that's really how they knew how much they were worth. And so Abraham had a lot of money. He had a lot of cattle. He had become wealthy. Now, how did he accumulate a lot of his wealth? Do you remember from last time? Wedding gifts from Pharaoh. Yeah, he was letting Sarah, his wife, stay in Pharaoh's harem, and he was living large off the wedding gifts. Well, when they leave Egypt, he took all of that with him. And so he's a wealthy man as a result of his dishonesty, really. And that wealth now starts to lead to some conflict. So, like I said, we would say these guys were loaded today because of their wealth from their time in Egypt. So, as Abraham and Lot settled down, the place they're staying in, the region they're staying in, could not feed all of the cattle. There was not enough water, there was not enough grass, there was not enough room for all of them. And so they started to kind of butt heads a little bit with their herdsmen. And so, as a result, they needed to split up here. So, instead of quarreling, Abraham suggests, again, he takes the initiative, he's the peacemaker. He says that the two should mutually part ways and even lets Lot choose which way to go. He says, Lot, you take your pick. I'm not going to assert my rights. You choose whatever you want for yourself. Now, like Rick talked about a little bit ago, this was an extremely generous gesture on Abraham's part, because as the older man, he could have looked at Lot and said, Lot, I don't care what happens to you. This whole thing is mine. You can get lost. I'm taking control of this entire area, and you have to go find something else for yourself, Lot. But instead, he lets Lot take the choice. Now, he's going to give up control of his future, and he's learning that God will provide for him. What was the mistake he made last time? He got to the promised land, and there's this severe liver famine, right? This heavy famine. What Abraham does is he takes control. And he chooses not to trust that God will provide for him, so he ends up running off to Egypt and making a bigger mess. This time, he's in the same exact situation. There's not enough water and not enough grass to go around. There's not enough to provide for him, so he's got to figure out where God's placed me. Is he going to provide for me? Is he going to take care of me here, or do I need to take control again and try to do it myself? And friends, listen, when you are in a trial, I'm going to come back to what we talked about last time. When you are in a trial, when you are in conflict with someone else, most of the time our default is to think, well, how do I make sure I come out of this okay? And we think we need to take control. How many control freaks are in the room with me? Let's all have a support group. Okay, yep, I'm right there with you. We think we need to take control and provide for ourselves. But where God's placed you, God will provide for you. You have to sometimes step back and say, God, I'm going to trust you with the outcome. My job is simply to be faithful. My job is simply to be obedient and be a peacemaker, especially when there's conflict, okay? Now, let's compare and contrast some of what Abraham and Lot do differently. Here's the wrong way to make a decision on page 17. Now, I want you to notice verse 10 here. It's at the bottom of my Bible. Here we are. Verse 10. Notice this phrase, Lot lifted up his eyes and saw all of the valley of Jordan. So notice that he lifted up his eyes. We'll come back to that later. And he chose for himself all of the land of the Jordan to the east. That's how he made his decision. So I want you to notice this. This is important because Abraham's going to do it differently. Lot lifts his own eyes up. And he sets his eyes on what he wants, and then he chooses for himself. You see this same exact terminology with David and Bathsheba. Okay? David and Bathsheba, right? David's out on the rooftop, and Bathsheba's over on her rooftop bathing, which she shouldn't have been doing. And David looks at Bathsheba and chooses for himself Bathsheba. Here's where we make mistakes, friends, in our decision making. When we start to look for ourselves and instead of letting God determine where we're looking, and choosing for ourselves instead of letting God choose for us. Okay? Where your eyes go and where you let your eyes go is very important. Because what you set your eyes on is what you will choose for yourself. Okay? What you set your eyes on is what you will choose for yourself. So that's how Lot decides to make this decision. So he chose all of the Jordan River Valley area, which was not only the best, this was a massive area. He didn't need all of this land. I don't care how rich the guy was. He did not need the entire Jordan River area. But he chose the whole thing for himself. And so this tells us that his decision was motivated by greed. Now, how many of you have heard the story of Ali Hafed? Has anybody heard this story before? Let me tell you a little greed story. Greed never works out. Ali Hafed was a guy who lived in Africa. This is a true story. He's a guy who lived in Africa during a time where they were starting to find a lot of diamonds and precious gems, particularly in Europe and areas like Spain or even out towards the Middle East. They were finding a lot of diamonds and precious gems. So Ali Hafed decided he was going to sell his farm in Africa, and he was going to travel and try to find a diamond mine and strike it out rich. So he sells everything and he starts traveling around, and for years he travels all over Europe and the Middle East and even Western Europe, and he's trying to find a diamond mine. Well, he ends up going bankrupt. He never does find his mine, and he ends up taking his own life in Barcelona. About 10 years later, the guy who bought his farm took his camel out to the garden to let the camel get some water to drink. Well, the camel started drinking and nudging down into the dirt, and then there's this big black rock in the dirt. And so the guy stoops down and he picks it up, and that's how they found the richest diamond mine in the history of the world. No diamond mine has ever produced larger diamonds or more money worth of diamonds than the one that Ali Hafed actually sold so that he could go out finding it elsewhere. Greed never works out for us, friends. Making a decision because you're not content or because you think there's greener grass, that does not work. Because where God's placed you, he's going to provide for you. You don't need to go running off to something else to try to provide for yourself. Lot doesn't understand that. Lot doesn't get this, so he makes a mistake. And so in the end, he's only thinking about himself. So I want you to understand this as well. Not only did Lot exclude God from his decision-making, he also excluded God from his lifestyle. Some of you have already alluded to that. There's no reference to Lot's relationship with God here, and he seems all too comfortable moving close to Sodom. Now, he's not in Sodom yet, but he's just kind of getting close to it. He thinks he can be close to sin and not get influenced by sin. How many of us have made that mistake before? Yeah? See, here's what we like to do, friends. I'll put my pen down here. Let's say this pen is the line, okay? What we like to do as Christians is we like to get as close to the line as we possibly can without stepping over into sin. Okay? And we say, well, this isn't technically wrong. This is okay. Can I get over here? And we like to get as close to sin as we can, and we think it's not going to impact us. But what ends up happening? You start to like playing with the line, don't you? And then you step over once and you tell yourself, that's all. I'll never do it again. It'll just be this one time. But then you find another reason to justify it. And you tell yourself that'll be the last time. And next thing you know, you're living over the line, right? How many of you have done that? That's my whole high school years, right? My point is this. Instead of trying to figure out how close we should get to the line, the goal is to figure out how close we can get to Jesus. And when you do that, you're not going to get remotely close to this line. This line shouldn't matter in your life. It's not about how close I can get to sin without sinning. It's how close I can get to God. That's the real goal. And Lot makes a mistake here. He gets close to sin thinking it won't affect him, but it will. And it's going to have terrible consequences for his entire family. So verses 12 through 13, we talked about this, say that Sodom is an exceedingly wicked city. It's a city that is notorious for how evil it is. And we'll see more of that later on in the study. So here's the right way to make a decision. Take a look at verses 14 and 15. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. So Lot lifted up his own eyes and chose for himself. Who directs Abraham's eyes here? God does. Who ultimately chooses for Abraham here? God does. That's the right way to make a decision. See, friends, listen, we go through life and we like to lift up our own eyes and figure out what we want for ourselves. The point today is this. You don't need to choose what you want for yourself. All you need to do is let God provide for you. Now, God might not always give you what you want, but he's a wise father who knows best. And when he doesn't give something to you that you want, trust that maybe it wasn't in your best interest anyway. Maybe it was something you wanted too much. Maybe it was something that would become an idol in your life. Maybe it was something that would only lead to harm down the road, because God loves giving good gifts to his children. We'll see that on Sunday. So he will give us what we need. He will give us what is good for us. And we have to trust that when he says no, he's saying no because he knows something that we don't. And Abraham figured that out. God placed me here. God's going to provide for me. So now think about how sweet this moment is where God says, Abraham, pick up your eyes and look that way. All of that's yours. Look that way too, because that's yours. Look that way. Look over here. As far as your eyes can see, Abraham, now that you finally let go of control, now that you finally went hands off, I'll give you it all. We said a couple of weeks ago, God can't fill our hands when they're already full. Right? He went hands off, so God filled his hands with everything he needed. God is going to make him great, but he had to let go first. Friends, we have to let go first. And so, notice this. God even promises Abraham the land to the east. Now, take a look. Verse 11. Lot chose for himself all the valley of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed which direction? Okay. This is one of my favorite things in the Bible, friends. Here's Lot, and he thinks, oh, this whole area is mine. I chose all the best land to the east. And God comes along and says, actually, Abe, that's yours too. All the land you let Lot take, he's going to borrow it for a little while, but that's all going to be yours. And that's all going to belong to your descendants. You don't just get all the other land, you're going to get Lot's land too. That is amazing, isn't it? Poetic justice indeed. Look at how God comes through here. Look at how God provides here. God has the final say, not Lot, not even Abraham. God provides and does it in a big way. So instead of taking land for himself, Abraham let God have control of his future and rewarded him. God rewarded him by giving him the promised land to him and his descendants forever. Now, I want you to go back with me to Genesis chapter 12. This is an important thing. Miss Pat brought this out a couple of weeks ago, I believe. Genesis chapter 12. We're going to see something important about this promise. So go back one chapter. Can I have somebody read verse 7 for me?
The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him.
Okay, so who did God originally promise the land to? Just his descendants. Is it promised to Abraham? He's not included, which is, kind of feels like a raw deal at first, right? Hey, I'll give this to all your kids and all their descendants, but you can't have it, right? That seems a little like a tease, but that's the promise. Well, because Abraham's let go of control, he's let go and let God provide for him, you get here to chapter 13, and he says at the end of verse 15, all the land which you see, I will give it to you. Now Abe's included in the promise. Now he's going to get the land too. All of it's going to belong to him. And he won't really see it until the very, very end of his life, but the promise is held true. God now includes him in the promise because he let go. This is just a practical thing. Here's the irony about selfishness. If you want to be most selfish, you should let God have the most control in your life. Right? Like, that's not the right motive. I understand that. But when we are selfish, we work out things far worse than God would have originally done for us. That's one of the lessons here. It is always in your best interest, in your family's best interest, and in everybody else in your life's best interest when you let God make these decisions, right? So, he let God have control of his future. So, again, here you see that God now promised this to Abraham, promised this land to Abraham himself, and so he responds by building an altar and worshiping the Lord at the end of the chapter. So that's how you make a decision. Let God decide for you, right? Let God direct you. You don't have to move yourself. And this is something Carl brought out last time. Sometimes in life we come on difficult circumstances and it's tough to know, should I move myself here? Is God trying to get my attention? Or should I stay where I am and let God provide for me? Here's my answer to that. Don't move yourself until God moves you. Every time in the Bible somebody moves themselves, it doesn't go well. Every time somebody tries to move themselves, it does not go well. But when people wait and God prompts them and says, go here, do this, now head in this direction, then it works out okay. Why? Because it's God who initiated. You don't have to move yourself in life. Let God move you in his timing when he's ready. And if he's not moving you, stay where you're at and trust him, because where he's placed you, he'll provide for you. So, what are a couple of lessons? Yeah.
Do you think when all this mess arose with Lot, Abraham remembered God told him to leave your family behind?
You know, he was being disobedient. Lot's going to be a key character in the next chapter. He's going to be a key character in chapter 19 as well. I mean, this is Lot's going to be like a bad penny who just keeps turning up in this story and causing problems for Abraham. And the Bible doesn't say that he remembered that, but I'm going to guess that he was smart enough and knew in the back of his mind, doggone, I shouldn't have brought this kid along. And this is going to be something I regret. And yeah, I would wager it was in the back of his mind. I know I would be thinking that. And it would be hard not to become resentful in the end. So here are a few lessons. Now I'm going to give you 4 lessons. Always, never, forget, remember. Now I'm going to tell you up front, these are not mine. I didn't come up with these. As I was listening to a sermon one day on the life of Abraham, Chuck Swindoll, some of you guys know Chuck Swindoll. he said these, and I thought to myself, I'm going to write these down. And when I put the workbook together, I thought, I'm never going to say it better than Chuck Swindoll did here. So this is all copycat stuff. I'm not going to take any credit for it, but these are really important truths, friends. So here's the first one for you. Always look beyond the immediate positive benefits of a decision. Which land looked like it was the best? The one that Lot chose, right? On the surface, that looked like a bright choice. And friends, a lot of times in life, we make decisions and we just look at the surface. Well, that looks like that's a no-brainer. And for Lot, he would have said the same thing. Oh, it's a no-brainer. Take the best land. But you have to learn to look beyond, okay, what comes along with this choice? What came along with the choice was Sodom. And that's not going to work out in the long run. And like I told you, Lot, if he could do it all over again, if he would make one decision different, it would be this decision because it led to a whole lot of heartache later down the road. We have to look at the long term, like Charles said, we have to look at eternity, not just the immediate benefits of a decision, not just how is this going to affect me right now, right? So our goal is to glorify God in every interaction, not just to fight for our rights. The one who made the right choice here was the one who didn't actually make the choice at all. It was Abraham, because his big decision was, I'm going to glorify God in this. I'm going to be the peacemaker. Here's the never. Never underestimate the consequences of leaving God out of your lifestyle and your decision making. Lot's going to do this, and it's going to seem like, and this is where I think the enemy trips us up sometimes. What tends to happen is the enemy tempts us to think, well, this decision's so easy, I don't need to consult God this time. Have you ever done that before? Oh gosh, this one's so easy, I don't need to pray about this one. That's an easy one.
It's easy to do that when you certain vehicle you might want.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, well, I can't take time to pray about this. Somebody else will buy it, you know? Maybe it's a car for you, maybe it's something else. I don't know. But you have decisions in life, and the enemy will tempt you, hey, this time you don't have to consult God. This is just that simple. And what happens is it becomes a habit to not consult God. It becomes a habit to leave God out of your decision-making. It becomes a habit to not pray and ask for his guidance. It becomes a habit to just do what looks right on the surface. And this had become a habit for Lot, and it's going to keep being a habit for Lot. And he's going to really regret it later. Okay? So don't leave God out of your decision-making. Friends, when you have a decision to make, financial, relational, doesn't matter. Take time to pause and say, Lord, this is the decision. Here's the options. But this looks right, and this is the direction I'm leaning towards, but stop me, God, if this isn't right. Because there are many times in Scripture where God calls his people to do things that make no sense, right? Joshua at Jericho. Hey, here's how you take the city. March around it 7 times. Really? You don't think we should, lay siege against the walls? Nope. Just march and blow your trumpets. Right? Like, God will call you to do things like that, friends, where everybody else is going to look at you like you're nuts. Hey, Noah, it's never rained before. Start building a boat, though. In a field? Yeah. Yeah, you're going to need that boat. It's an ark. You're right. I appreciate you. You busted me on that one good.
Or at least for me, I'm learning that even in the little decisions, we start there.
Yes. Yes.
Because if we're willing to pray about the little decisions, the little everyday things, then it's not so hard when big things.
Exactly. So your character and your habits are formed in the little things, right? So, and one of the areas I'm learning this right now is with my schedule, because I'm learning that I have had a tendency over the last couple of months to say yes to too many things that are really good, but I can't fit it all in. And so I'm learning to pray, and I've been trying to do this every Saturday because I look at my schedule a week in advance. Every Saturday, God, here's all the good things. I have to say no to some good things, Lord, because I can't fit it all in. What should I say yes to? What should I say no to? That's a little thing if you really think about it. You could just be a yes person and say yes to all of them. But learning it there is really important, because then when the big decisions come, you're in the habit, right? You're in the habit of saying, no, I need to pause. I don't need to make a rash decision. I'm going to let God lift up my eyes. I'm going to let God tell me where to look, and I'm going to let God tell me what he's going to give me in the situation instead of needing to claim it for myself. Yeah, I would start with the small things, friends. Start with the small things, okay? So we can't exclude God from our decisions and expect him to bless our lives. How many of you have learned that lesson the hard way with me? Yep, that'll be the other support group we start. I've tried that too many times, right? God, I'm going to go my own way, and then you say, God, here's what I'm going to do. I hope you bless it later, right? That's not how that works, right? God says, go where I tell you, and then I will bless you. And we're like, no, I want to go over here, and you should still bless me, Lord. That doesn't work. We have to let God direct us in life. Here's the last couple of lessons. Forget. Forget about trying to please yourself. Live to please God, and he will satisfy you. Forget about yourself in all of these interactions. Forget about yourself in conflict. It's hard because nobody else is thinking about you, right? So you think, well, somebody's got to think about me. It might as well be me. But God says, forget about yourself. Deny yourself. Take up your cross and follow me. Live to please me. I'll take care of all of your needs. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added to you. We talked about that in church a couple of weeks ago. Last one here. Remember that you become like the people you spend time with. You become like the people you spend time with. Lot is going to become like Sodom because he got too close to Sodom. And friends, I see this all the time. I see it with teenagers most, but I think adults struggle with it too. We think we can surround ourselves with the wrong crowd and maintain our good morals in our Christian living, and that's not how it works. 1 Corinthians 16:33, bad company corrupts good morals. You become like the people you spend time with. Lot's going to learn that lesson the hard way. Okay? In fact, we'll see it in the next chapter, next week. Okay? So here's a couple things we can talk through. Of those final points, always, never, forget, remember. Which one stood out to you the most and why? What are some lessons, some takeaways for you after we walk through this lesson, chapter 13? What are some of the takeaways that you can say, okay, this is something I need to remember. This is something I need to do differently.